On this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast, I'm joined by the man behind IWill Olly Richards. Olly and I talk about language learning, and we go into specific details about Chinese and Japanese.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris Broholm, and today I have a very interesting guest lineup for you guys. It's Olly Richards from IWill and Olly is one of the people I followed in great detail before I decided to start my own blog. And in terms of inspiration, he definitely delivers, and he also has a lot of specific advice for people who want to learn languages. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out IWillteachyoualanguage.com, and it does what it says on the tin. Now, before we get into the interview, I just want to get a few admin things out of the way, and there aren't that many specific actual fluency news, so I'll just go straight to these little announcements. And the first is that Actual Fluency has been nominated in the category Top Language Lover Blogs of 2014. It's a yearly competition that's run by Babbler, and considering that my blog is only from, I started in February this year, and I was, eagerly following the competition last year, it is incredibly humbling for me to already be, nominated in the category. And although I'm probably unlikely to win, I'm up against some amazing blogs like, Lindsay, and also Ollys is up there, and of course the giant Benny Lewis, but he can't win every year, right? So, all that I ask of you is vote for your favorite one. And if you want to throw a vote for Actual Fluency, I'll definitely love you for it. And an easy link for the vote is if you go to actualfluency.com/vote. And I'll greatly appreciate it. And Actual Fluency, in advantage of being with A, it is at the top of the list. So hopefully that's telling more than just the alphabetic value of the name. The other announcement that I had was that italki, my favorite tutoring platform where I'm tutoring people in Danish, and I'm actually about to do some tutoring sessions in Russian. I just need to find out who exactly to choose. So if you have any experience with any Russian teachers on italki, preferably professional teachers, then do throw a comment below or send me an email via the contact page on the actualfluency.com. The promotion they're running for the end of May until the end of May is that you can get free 100 credits just by signing up. And the way you do is you just go to actualfluency.com/italki, and if you're a new user, you will be credited 100 free credits. And I think I might be getting something as well. I don't know if I get anything, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is that you get a free 100 credits, and you can actually, for most languages, 100 credits is more than enough to book a session with. So it's a free 1-hour session with a community teacher on italki, which I think is a very good promotion. And so obviously they're doing it to attract new users. And as a teacher on there, or a tutor if you prefer, I can definitely recommend it. It's a very good site, and you can definitely learn a lot if you allow it. So have 100 free credits by using the URL actualfluency.com/italki. And that's about it. That's all the admin for today. And now it's on to the main event, which is the interview with Mr. Olly Richards. And in the interview, I'm just going to give a little warning, or perhaps a heads up if you prefer. We're talking a lot about Asian languages because my fascination with Olly was that he learned Japanese and Chinese, which for Westerners, I mean, he's from England and I'm from Denmark. So for the people around those regions, those would be seen as perhaps some of the most advanced languages to learn. So that's why we go into a lot of detail about this. And I don't know anything about these languages. So I hope that by me asking these kind of beginnerish questions to Olly, that you might also find them useful if you plan to study Chinese or indeed Japanese or a similar language even. So that's all I want to say. I just want to enjoy the interview with Olly Richards, and I'll see you later. All right, today I'm excited to welcome onto the show Mr. Olly Richards. Olly is the man behind IWill and speaks 7 languages. He shares top advice on language learning and shares experiences through writing on his blog and videos on his YouTube channel. Welcome to the show, Olly. How are you today?
Hey, Chris. Thanks very much. Very pleased to be here.
Fantastic. And Olly, I've given the listeners a brief introduction of yourself, but maybe you just want to take a minute so they can get to know you a little bit better on how you got started with all this language learning.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I guess the first thing to say is that I really started. Well, the first time I learned any languages was at school. I did French and German for a couple of years at secondary school, high school for those in the States, and I was pretty average student. I learned a few bits or pieces, but you come out of school and you can't really speak much. So I was sort of 18, 19, and I didn't have any language skills to speak of. And it all sort of started when I decided I did my first year at university, and I was studying jazz piano, which was really cool and a lot of fun. And but after a year, I decided to take some time out because I actually wanted to spend a year just practicing piano, and I wanted to become really, really good. But I was sort of knocked for six a little bit because my girlfriend at the time decided we should break up. And that sort of threw me into this big downward spiral, and I ended up not being able to do any practice and not focus on the music. And I ended up getting a job in a cafe in central London. Right. And then so I was sort of sitting there serving coffee all day, but I was surrounded by people from all over the place. People from Sweden, from Italy, from Spain, from France, and so I just, for the first time, came into contact with people who weren't from the UK, and so that sort of opened up my eyes to the big wide world, if you like. Mm-hmm. And that was the point where I started becoming interested in actually, I started to think, how cool would it be if I could actually talk to this person in Spanish, or that girl in French. Right. And so that's sort of when it started, and then after that I kind of went on various language learning missions and sort of picked up languages one after the other. You snowballed off that initial success. Yeah, exactly. But did you, at the time when you were working in the cafe and you spoke basically only one language, did you consider it almost impossible, the idea of learning a new language, or had you had any exposure to the polyglot world, or anyone who would be multilingual enough for you to see it as a realistic opportunity? Well, the thing is that I didn't. Well, your first point was about, did I think it was impossible? And no, I didn't. I've always had a sort of can-do attitude to stuff, I think, and I don't think anything's impossible. I never really have. That's not to say that I knew how to do it or how to go about it, but I knew that I would be able to if I set my mind to it. But the other thing is, when you meet people, especially from Scandinavia, people, a lot of the sort of Swedish guys that I met, they spoke perfect English, completely flawless. And the Italian girl spoke Spanish, and the French girl spoke German, and so you meet these people and you realize, look, a lot of people out there speak plenty of languages, and they've just grown up that way. Right. So and then they're just normal people, just that they've grown up in an environment where another language is not seen as such a sort of foreign concept like it is in the UK. It's just something natural. So it was your exposure to the foreign cultures that kind of inspired you. And the reason I say this is, of course, because I think a lot of people around the world
who might be new to learning languages might see it as a very, very difficult task. And that isn't to say that it's easy, that by no means of the imagination, but it's very hard to begin learning a language if you believe that it's impossible. Wouldn't you say so?
Well, yeah, I mean, but I think in that sense you can apply that to anything, you know, whether you want to build a business or whether you want to learn a language or become an athlete. You know, it all starts from the mindset. You've got to believe it's possible, and you have to have the desire to do it. And then after that, it's just a case of taking one step at a time and keeping that motivation there. You know, that's really what it comes down to, I think. You know, if I find myself one day not motivated to keep on learning a language, that's it for me. You know, there's nothing I can do to carry on. This is game over.
So which one did you start out with? Was that French or? Yeah,
it was French. Well, I mean, when I was working in that cafe only for a couple of months, and I dabbled in a bit of French and a bit of Italian, but not really seriously. I didn't really know what I was doing. But after a few months, I actually quit and I bought a one-way ticket to Paris. Wow. I had a bit of cash. I had my student loan from the second year, you see, so I shouldn't have had it, but I did. So I thought, you know, let's go and spend it. So I jumped on the Eurostar, went to Paris, and I said, right, I'm going to see what happens here. And I ended up blagging my way into a job after a few weeks in Paris. And it was a job where I was working in a youth hostel. Mm-hmm. And so I had to use English a lot, but I also obviously had a lot of French customers in. So I kind of threw myself into that job and I just had to learn French. I had no option at that point. Which is kind of crazy looking back on it. I mean, I wouldn't do that now.
Yeah.
15 years later, you know, but I did at the time. I guess, you know, when you're that age, you just don't really care that much, do you? So, right. But again, I think that it does show that I really wanted it, you know?
Right. You didn't go to Paris, which is obviously a big tourist location, and just found yourself in kind of an English bubble or something. You actually threw yourself in a place like in a reception desk where lots of French people came through. So I did have something of an English bubble. I mean, I was actually staying in a youth hostel at the time, so I was surrounded by tourists actually. But you know, over time that started to dissipate a bit, and I started to, you know, make French friends, and you know, ended up with a French girlfriend, and so, you know, bit by bit that you know, I started to have a slightly more French life, you know. But it was, you know, I don't know if you want to make any general conclusions about immersion, but what do you think about, you know, living abroad compared to studying a language from home? I know you've done both. What do you think? Is it as good as one would expect, or can you sort of mimic the experience at home as well and achieve good results there too?
Well, I mean, if the question is, can you achieve good results at home without being immersed in the culture, then absolutely.
Right. How important is it, I guess, is the big question. How important is it to be in the country when you're learning a language?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I think most people probably don't have a choice. You know, right. Asking that question in a way is like saying, you know, for people who do live at home and don't live abroad, you know, it's kind of a non-starter really, because most people can't just pick up and move.
Of course.
Move abroad. I mean, so it's absolutely not necessary. But obviously, if you do live in the country where the language is spoken, you've got, I think, you've got more opportunities. But I think, you know, it's important to realize that probably, you know, the majority of people that do go and live abroad don't really get very far in that language. No. It's not a given at all. And you know, everywhere I've lived abroad, I've been surrounded by people, the majority of whom don't speak the local language. So, you know, it's certainly not a case of if you live abroad, that's it, you're going to become fluent in 2 weeks. You've got to put in all the work. Right. And if you do what a lot of people do and fall into a kind of expat bubble, in a way that's much harder, because you can start to get frustrated. Mm-hmm. A lot of people in Japan, for example, where I was for a few years, find themselves in an expat bubble, and it's difficult to break out. And then so they build this. They see Japanese people and the prospect of talking with Japanese people and practicing their Japanese, it starts to become this massive thing in their head, and it just becomes something that can be quite difficult to get over. So, I mean, but then again, if you do live in the country and you've got some good study habits and you are actively trying to learn the language, then of course you do have extra benefits. I mean, you're surrounded by the language every day. You've got more people to practice with. It's real interaction with people as opposed to, I don't know, learning on Skype or something.
Right.
So there are differences, but that is really important. I think that's not used as an excuse not to get started.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a leading question, I guess, in that I think that when you're learning a language from home, you can get very far, and because you're kind of dedicated to learning the language and you take on the task, it's a lot different mentality than being in the country and you're kind of like, oh, well, I'm here and I'm listening to the language, so I must be learning it, right? A good learner at home probably gets infinitely more done than a bad learner in the country.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I've seen cases of both happening. And I've been guilty of that myself. When I went to Japan for the first time, I was, well, I've only been once, but when I went to actually live there, I didn't do much in the first year.
Right.
Language learning wasn't really top of my agenda. I'd started a new job and I was focused on living and doing my job, and I didn't focus on the language. And I spent the first year not really having any proper study routine, and I picked up a load of vocabulary and functional language along the way, but I really didn't make a great deal of progress in that first year. So it just goes to show it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Right.
It's not without its challenges.
Right. And obviously, you've learned a lot of great languages, but for me, the two that kind of stand out a little bit are the Japanese and the Cantonese. What drew you to these Asian languages?
Well, in Japan, it was purely because I was living there.
Right.
So I wanted to learn it.
So you went to Japan before you started learning the language?
Yeah, I didn't know any Japanese.
Right.
I mean, I think I'd learned to write. I'd learned the hiragana alphabet, and I tried to learn katakana, but it wouldn't really stick because they're fairly similar. But essentially, no, I didn't. I knew nothing.
Right.
And I mean, I did want to go to Japan, and I was really into Japanese culture. And the prospect of going to Japan was cool. I was excited by it. So that obviously helped. And then in terms of Cantonese, it's funny because I've been to Hong Kong a couple of times on holiday, and have some friends from Hong Kong, and it's, and I've always enjoyed watching, sort of Bruce Lee and all these martial arts movies. So it was a culture that kind of just started growing up on me. I just started developing an interest, just like everyone does, in one language or another. And it just got to a point where I said, you know what, I want a new challenge. Let's try Cantonese. And so yeah, that was really the first time that I tackled a language that I really had not much involvement in, and I wasn't living there and didn't have any friends around me who were speaking it. So that was my first sort of big outsider language learning experience.
What kind of difficulties did you find when learning Cantonese? How long have you been learning it for now?
Less than a year.
Right.
Excuse me. Probably about getting on for 9 months now, 9 months. And it hasn't been intensive at all. I've been doing it fairly. I've been trying to keep it consistent, but not really. I haven't been going at it full on.
Right. That's the important bit, isn't it? Anyway, I mean, that's my personal opinion, is that it's better to do something every day for a small amount of time than, doing something sporadically once a week or something for a longer amount of time.
Yeah, and because it's more. I mean, Cantonese for me has been more of a hobby than other languages. I'm not in any great rush to learn it, so I'm sort of happy to happy to just kind of enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Whereas with Japanese, I mean, because I was in Japan, I had that incentive to get off my ass and actually do the work.
It's more intensive.
Yeah, I don't have that now, but it's more enjoyable in a way because I can just enjoy the process and enjoy spending time with the language.
Yeah, I saw some of your status update videos for fun. I looked at the month 1, and then I looked at month 2 and 3 and 4, and it seemed like you made quite rapid progress there. You had some conversations, and I mean, yeah, you had some pauses here and there and stumbles, but do you feel that your experience from learning all the other languages is kind of speeding up the process at this point, even at such a difficult language as Cantonese?
Yeah, honestly, it's difficult to say. I don't think that the language itself is made any easier by the other languages I've learned because Cantonese is like no other language I've learned at all. Japanese has some bearing on it in that I know some of the Chinese characters, but it's very different. So I've really been starting from scratch with the language. But what has had a big bearing is just the kind of having been through the learning process so many times.
Right.
And I didn't necessarily realize this myself, but I think when I kind of get comments and questions from people on my blog, I sort of start to realize where a lot of the problems that people have lie, and a lot of the time it's not really knowing what to expect from the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now I realize that with Cantonese, being such a difficult language, the big advantage that I brought to the table was that I knew what to expect.
Right.
So when I was trying to speak and it was really hard, it didn't bother me that much. When I was trying to learn this new vocabulary and there was just so much to learn and I didn't know how I was going to learn it, I didn't get too frustrated because I knew that's the process that you've got to go through.
Right.
And so that, in that sense, it was more manageable.
That was the experience of the previous languages, not so much the actual languages. It was more the process that helped you for Cantonese. Yeah,
because I don't really believe that any. I don't know. It depends where you're coming from, what your mother tongue is, but I don't think that objectively there is much difference. I mean, when people say this language is harder than that or that language is harder than the other, it's a false dichotomy really, because all right, Cantonese may be harder than French for an English speaker, but it's the motivation that you bring and your passion for learning is infinitely more important than the content of the language that you have that needs to be learned.
That's good. And if you have any, do you have any specific advice for people who are looking to learn, let's say Cantonese first, but also Japanese, coming back to that before they start?
Well, there's a lot. It sort of depends what aspects you want to focus on. But I think the thing is really you've got to expect it to take time.
Right.
Don't go in there thinking I'm gonna I've got to be fluent in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So just the realization that it's going to take time.
Right.
Right, straight away that relieves the pressure a little bit. You can afford to make mistakes. You can afford not to be perfect. You can afford not to remember all this vocabulary from the start. So I think Asian languages do tend to be tough for Westerners, and yeah, I'd say the most important mindset is just not to expect too much from the start and just be prepared for it to take time.
Excellent. And I mean, I haven't had any experience with Asian languages, so you can help me out here as well. But what is your general wisdom when talking about the scripts? Because I've heard a lot of people recommend that you learn the oral language first before you start looking at the characters. Is that? Do you agree with that, or do you have another approach to this?
Listen, I've seen it argued very convincingly both ways. and I think I wouldn't like to say which is better, whether you should learn the script at the start or whether you should ignore the script and just learn the language. But I think there are a few things to point out on that topic. The first one being that learning the script in a Chinese dialect, for example, or in the case of Japanese, the kanji, because in the case of Japanese, the hiragana and the katakana are fairly easy to learn, so you should definitely learn that straight away.
Right.
No question, because that's manageable and learnable in a weekend if you really want to. So in the case of Japanese, we're talking about the kanji, the Chinese characters, and then in the case of obviously Mandarin or Cantonese, we're talking about, well, there is only, the field of Chinese characters.
Right.
So, the thing about that is it's a massive task to learn Chinese characters. You can't underestimate the size of the task. And so if you've only got a finite amount of time to study every day, then inevitably it's going to detract from the amount of time you've got to do other things.
Right.
And so if you're sort of short on time and you still want to make progress with your speaking and you want to really be able to speak, and that's the most important thing for you, and you're not necessarily looking to integrate into Chinese lifestyle, then I think, my personal approach is not to do much with Chinese characters.
Right.
I learned quite a few in Japan, and I've obviously brought some of those with me to Cantonese. But I've personally I've avoided spending a lot of time learning Chinese characters because I just feel that I can get a lot more benefit from focusing on vocabulary and speaking in particular, because that's my aim.
Right.
So I think it really comes down to understanding how long it's going to take, how much time it's going to take to learn Chinese characters, and then making that call for yourself, whether or not you want to spend that time.
Right.
All things being equal, then learn the characters from the beginning, but all things are never equal, so
of course.
So that's just the choice that has to be made, I think.
And again, reiterating that you need to find your focus. If you want to learn it just to speak it casually and in conversation, then maybe the characters is not that big of a focus for you. But if you want the full package and you're okay with spending relatively large amount of time on it, then go ahead and do it. But as you say, it has to fit with your goals.
Yeah, exactly. And I really don't think you can make a judgment either way, because I've heard from people who said, one guy, I think he watched one of my Cantonese videos. It was early on, I think 2 or 3 months, and he said, "Man, I've been living in China for 2 years, and I focused on learning Chinese characters, but I can't speak as well as you." And not that I was speaking very well at all at that stage, but the point is, there's a case in point of someone who has spent a lot of time focusing on Chinese characters, and as a result hasn't got very far in his speaking.
His spoken and suffering, yeah.
Yeah. So who knows his particular situation? That might not apply to everybody, but that's it's certainly a risk and something you've got to consider.
Right. If again, I don't know anything about this. Can you just briefly give a difference between Chinese characters and the Japanese characters for somebody who doesn't know anything about it? Because it seems like you say, well, Japanese, you should definitely do it. In Chinese, I would consider not doing it. But why is there such a difference there? Can you give me the 1 minute crash course?
Yeah, sure. Let me clarify then. So in Japanese, you've got 3 alphabets. You've got the hiragana and katakana, which are phonetic alphabets with, I think, around about 50 characters in each one.
Uh-huh.
And so any word in Japanese you can write in either hiragana or katakana.
Okay.
It's phonetic.
So that's like an alphabet, basically.
It's like an alphabet, except a large amount of words, I'd say the majority of words, are not written in hiragana or katakana, but they're written in Chinese characters.
Right.
which is the third alphabet, if you like, in Japanese, except, you need to learn around about 2,000 of those Chinese characters
Right.
to be fluent according to the definition of the Japanese government. It's 1,981 Chinese characters that
Wow.
are suggested for daily use. It was. I think that number might have changed slightly now, but that's the ballpark figure. And so that's the real challenge in Japanese is to learn those.
Right.
Those 2,000 kanji. Now, in terms of Chinese, you've got, as far as I know, and I'm no expert on this, but you've got two different sets of Chinese characters in Chinese. You've got simplified and traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Now, simplified Chinese characters are what is used in Mandarin in the mainland, and they are similar to the kind of the Chinese characters you get in Japan, but they've been simplified in order to make them easier to learn. And they originally came from traditional Chinese characters, which is what they still use in Hong Kong and I think in Taiwan as well. And they're much more complicated. They've got many more strokes, and they're more old school, beautiful characters.
Right.
So is that?
Yeah, that explains it. How do you know how many there are of those, or is that a completely unknown scale?
I've heard various numbers, but you're talking in the 5 figures. It's at least 10,000 of them.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big task.
That's why I'm saying you really can't underestimate the size of that.
Right. And I'm imagining just the memory for Westerners, so to speak, is like, you can remember an alphabet of, say, 20, 30, 40 characters, but remembering thousands of pictures, essentially is it's a mind-boggling thing. And for anyone who's done it, I really can't describe how envious I am of that feat, because that is incredible.
Yeah, although just on that point, that's not to say that you have to learn every single character new, because what you find is the more that you learn, the easier it gets, because every character is composed of different parts.
Right.
So you have a lot of kind of base, sort of fundamental characters, and then a lot of the more complicated characters are just composites of those more simple characters. So, it does actually definitely get easier the more that you learn.
Right. Well, that's always a positive, I would say.
Well, yeah, you got to look for the positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, you're never going to do it.
So, would you recommend people learning Cantonese, or should they learn Mandarin or one of the others? What are the reasons for learning one over the other?
Well, that's very difficult to answer, because I'd say if you're interested in it, then learn it. If you're not, then don't. Right. Really, if it's purely, I don't know why one would learn a language without a particular interest in it. I don't know.
Well, maybe they just want to learn Chinese and they don't know there's 2 different Chineses.
Yeah, I guess.
Multiple.
Well, you got to think about if you plan on using it. Then I guess it's like, would you plan on going to Hong Kong? Where do you see yourself spending the most time? Right.
Are they similar? How? Of course they're similar, but how similar are they? I guess is my question, because I'm from Denmark and we have the similarity between Norway and Norwegian and Swedish. Is there a similar relationship in Cantonese and Mandarin where they have the same kind of structure and use different words?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because the Cantonese is a funny one, because Cantonese has no proper written language. Cantonese is a spoken dialect, and so the words are different from China. However, you would write them in the same way. So someone from mainland China can read things that are written down in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong you write Cantonese down using traditional Chinese, not Cantonese.
Right.
And so the grammar structure of Mandarin and Cantonese are virtually identical as far as I'm aware. What differs is when you speak Cantonese, you use different words.
Right.
So you're going to get a word which written down you would pronounce one way, but then when you speak it, you pronounce it another way.
Wow.
So it's not straightforward.
That's interesting.
I'll get my head around that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, just even the concept is a little bit, it's quite foreign to me that you can have a different spoken and written language existing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good analogy is if you think of street language I mean, I can only really think of the UK as an example. If you think of like someone walking down the street in East London,
right,
the way he's going to talk, you would never write that down if you were writing a kind of a serious piece of writing.
No.
That's not how you write. So the way that you speak on the street and the way that you write in the proper language, they're different.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see it, draw that kind of analogy.
Right. And going back a little bit to, you briefly mentioned motivation. What do you do to keep motivated during let's say, one of your language missions?
It's always different for me, to be honest. Cantonese has been a different experience because, like I say, I'm not surrounded by the people or the culture. So certainly in the past, when I've started to learn a language, it's always been because I've got a very real, tangible reason for learning that language. So
right.
With French, I was living in France. When I was in France, I learned Italian because I wanted to go to Italy, and then I went to Italy. And then when I went back to the UK, I had a Spanish friend, so I learned Spanish. And so motivation has never really been a problem for me because I'm motivated by the people around me and
right.
The prospect of being able to speak and communicate with other people in their language. Assuming it's people that I like and people who are around me. That's really all the motivation I've needed to have. But in Cantonese, it's different because, like I said, I'm pretty isolated here where I am now in Qatar, and it's been difficult to stay motivated because I've got no one to speak to, and it really comes down to, for me, at the moment, and it's this current language that I'm trying to learn, it comes down to having a routine and just doing it every day.
Well, that might be a good segue into my next question. One of the questions I like to ask everyone who comes on is, if you had to learn a new foreign language from scratch, starting tomorrow, what kind of routines and methods would you work on? And of course, this is the concise version. If you had to talk about every single detail, we could probably spend 2 or 3 episodes. But kind of an overview of the language learning method that you've. And I use the word method carefully. Here I just mean a collection of ideas that you've kind of assimilated from all your experiences of learning these different languages. Yeah,
well, I could give you a fairly realistic example, actually, because I've recently found out that I'm going to be moving to Egypt, and so I want to learn Arabic. I know some Arabic already. Last year I took some lessons and I learned to read and write. But in terms of kind of conversational ability, I'm, for all intents and purposes, I'm at zero.
Okay.
So it's something that I'm actually, gearing up for right now. So it's something I'm going to have to do in the coming months. So, the sort of back of a napkin version.
Right.
Is I will start by getting hold of a textbook that I like. I don't know which one yet for Arabic. I quite like the Teach Yourself series. A lot of people use IWill. I'm going to get one of those and I'm going to work through it.
Yeah.
Quite systematically. And at the same time, I'm going to try and get hold of some TV or some movies in Arabic, in Egyptian Arabic, that I like, and I'm going to start watching them a lot in my free time.
Right.
With the textbook, I'm going to focus on 2 things. Firstly, on vocabulary. I'm going to look at as I go through the lessons and study, I'm going to isolate words and phrases that I think are going to be very useful, and I'm going to make an effort to learn those. And then the second thing is I'm going to concentrate on the audio that comes with the book, and I'm going to spend a lot of time every day just listening to the audio and reading, following it through with the text.
Right.
Listening and reading, listening and reading, listening and reading. And I'm going to do that for a good couple of months to get that real solid foundation. And at that point, then I'll start speaking more. I mean, that's not to say I won't speak before that, but I mean, I'll start creating structured opportunities to speak.
Right.
So I'll start meeting with a language partner 2 or 3 times a week, maybe for just half an hour, and then just speaking with that person 2 or 3 times a week and getting feedback from them on my dreadful Arabic, and then basically then just repeat all of the above.
Right. And you talked about the importance of having a routine. So would you have like a to-do list or a calendar where you put in 50 minutes of this, then that, or how structured are you when it comes to the organization of it?
Yeah, I'm not a particularly disciplined person, which is my major downfall in all areas of my life,
right?
Not just language learning. And I have trouble, to be honest. I have real trouble with traditional goal setting, setting a routine, things like this. I'm too impatient. I'm too,
right.
I just don't have that sticking power. So I take an approach which is something that I've called sprints. And the idea of a sprint is that you, rather than sort of setting your goals and then breaking them down into sub goals and then individual things, I tend to just focus on one thing and I just go all out with that one thing.
All right. For
a certain period of time. So the idea is that you're kind of sprinting in one direction for as long as you can, for as long as you want to.
Right.
So for example, I might say, right, I'm starting Arabic, so I'm going to really tackle this textbook. I've got this textbook. I know that I need to learn some of the basics inside this textbook. So I'm just going to go hell for leather at this textbook for I don't know, an hour a day, perhaps. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I run out of steam.
Right.
And, I've found in the past that time frame is typically about 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, I start to get bored and I want to change.
Right. And then you find alternatives.
Yeah. And then I find something else. I find something else that I know is going to be helpful and that I need. And I will then go at that all in for another period of time. And I found that the major advantage of doing this is that you just go really into depth with stuff.
Right.
And if you try to do 3 or 4 things at the same time every day, you're kind of jumping from one thing to the next and you don't really get, deep inside that thing. So, I found that focus and concentration on one thing alone, it sort of pushes your brain further than it would otherwise go. Right. And that I find, really helps to solidify what you're doing.
Right. And you obviously have a musical background as well. Do you incorporate that in when you're learning a new language, finding some local music or?
Not explicitly. No. I mean, I found music in the past, but it's not something that I consciously do.
It's an interesting concept. Suzanne Zarevsky talks about it in her book, learning languages through music. And I don't do it, but maybe when you had that musical background, maybe you had an easier time of using the concept.
Well, I mean, let me caveat that by saying that actually when I learned Portuguese, I learned Portuguese entirely through music.
Oh, there you go.
At the beginning. It's just that, what I did is I sat in my room and I learned the words to all these bossa nova songs, right, and learned to play them on the guitar and sing them at the same time. But the thing about that is I'm crazy about Brazilian music. I love Brazilian music. So I could and I did do that for hours on end, weeks, days after, months, weeks, days. I just kept on going. But I don't think I could do that with Arabic, for example, because I don't particularly like Arabic music.
Right.
It's not my thing. And likewise, I didn't do that with J-pop either. In Japan, J-pop drives me crazy. So, if you happen to love the music of the language that you're learning, then yes, absolutely go for it. But one of the disadvantages of being a musician is that you get quite picky about the kind of music that you listen to. So right. I'm a bit fussy in that sense.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, so a last question about language learning here is, or maybe not a question, but more of a realization that when you learn a lot of languages and you move from one to the next, and obviously you don't live in a country where every single language is spoken daily, do you suffer from kind of language deterioration, and do you have any tools or things you do to try and combat that?
Yeah, yes is the answer. I mean, to the first part, I do suffer from language deterioration, definitely. I mean, my French, for example, used to be great when I was in Paris, and whilst I still understand everything, I can't speak it particularly well anymore, or certainly not as well as I used to. And my Japanese, I've been out of Japan now for a year and a half, and I haven't used my Japanese, so I notice myself getting less sharp.
Right.
The thing is for me that I really don't treat language learning for me is not a sort of academic exercise that I do for the sake of it. It's really it's something that I almost feel like I have to do because of my surroundings. So
right,
when I was in Japan, I had to learn Japanese. I mean, for me, there's just no choice. I felt like I had to do it, and so for me, the whole reason I'm learning the language is because of either the environment that I'm in or the people that I'm with. And so if I move away from that environment, I don't force myself to keep learning or to keep speaking the language. I mean, I might want to. I've been, for example, I've been watching a lot of Japanese TV recently because I really like it. But basically, I stop really trying when my motivation to speak it disappears or if my environment changes. And so the natural consequence of that is that the languages do deteriorate. And so if I were to start speaking French right now, I'd struggle.
Right.
But in a way, I don't really care, because I know that if I went to France and I spent a couple of weeks there, I know it would all come back eventually.
It's not lost, is the point, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, if I leave it too much longer, maybe it will be. But I just honestly, I don't really care whether I lose it too much, because I know I will speak the language again at some point. But when I do, it's because when I do come to speak Spanish again, for example, regularly, it's because I'm going to be with my best friend in Canary Islands, and we're going to just speak Spanish for 2 weeks nonstop. And okay, I'll be a bit rusty at the beginning, but it will come back, and I've got confidence in that. And so it's not something that really keeps me up at night. But obviously, the result of that is I'm not someone who can necessarily speak. I mean, I've learned 7 languages, but I can't necessarily speak all of those at the top of my game at any one point.
Right.
I've seen, there are some people out there, Luca and Richard, for example, who speak, over a dozen languages, and they can do it all at the same time, at an incredibly high level. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
It's not really something that I'm really aiming for, and so I tend to take a very sort of natural approach to it, and when I need it, I sort of dredge it out.
Right.
And
and I guess an important point is also, just because you can't speak it due to having not used it enough, you still understand pretty much the same level. I mean, that doesn't go away, does it?
It doesn't. I haven't found it to go away.
No.
I mean, obviously, I probably don't understand 100% of what I would have done 10 years ago. But I mean, I guess I do tend to. I do tend to watch stuff on TV or to listen to something in the different languages from time to time, and that kind of acts as a booster.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, what goes first is the speaking.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, that if you don't speak for a while, that disappears really quickly. And so, I guess for someone who's maybe got one main foreign language that they speak and who don't live, who have moved away and haven't got the opportunity to speak that, then I think if you want to maintain it, then you've got to just take the logical approach. You've just got to use it.
Right.
You have to watch movies in the language. You have to read in the language. You have to schedule in opportunities to speak on Skype with people in the language.
Right.
If you don't want to lose it, that's what you've got to do.
Fantastic. And that's pretty much it. If people want to find out more about you, or maybe you can talk about what you're working on now, if you have any stuff coming onto your blog, or where people can find you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been really basically out of action for the last 3 or 4 months because I've been working on finishing my master's dissertation, and that's all recently just been submitted. And
Sweet.
And it's amazing. I've finally got time again. So I feel like I'm just getting started on the blog now. Recently, I've got time to write, and I've got a lot of great things that I'm sort of planning. I've got a list of about 30 articles that I want to write, and they're all going to be coming up in the not too distant future. And yeah, that's all over at IWillTeachYouALanguage.com.
Excellent. And what a saying title, by the way.
Well, yeah, it does what it says on the tin, right?
Exactly. And I want to thank you so much, Olly, for coming out to the show and indeed making the connection, as I've been following you for a while. So it's very nice to put the direct live voice behind the face with the guitar.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Chris. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. See you later.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.